The cold, sterile air of the community center classroom did little to cool the heat crawling under Sarah Jenkins's collar. She stood at the front of the room, a laminated photo of a human heart pinned to the whiteboard beside her. A dozen pairs of eyes, belonging to men and women from the small town of Millbrook, looked back at her with polite, if slightly bored, attention. This was the first night of her basic first aid and emergency preparedness course, and a 4-week commitment she had agreed to teach as a favor to the town's recreation department. It felt a universe away from everything she had once known. Sarah was 34, with a body honed by years of discipline and a face that held a quiet, watchful stillness. She wore a simple navy blue polo shirt and khakis, her brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. To the class, she was just Sarah, the quiet woman who had bought the old Miller place on the edge of town a few months ago. Where she kept to herself, was seen jogging the back roads at dawn, and was unfailingly polite. No one knew she was a ghost of a different life. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice calm and even. "So, for a severe bleed, direct pressure is always your first step. But sometimes a wound is on a limb and direct pressure isn't enough. That's where a tourniquet comes in. Has anyone here ever applied one?" A few people shook their heads. A young man in a flannel shirt who worked at the local hardware store piped up. "Saw it on a TV show once. They just tie a belt around the leg, right?" "Not exactly," Sarah said, a faint smile touching her lips. "If you do it wrong, you can cause more damage than the bleed itself. It's a tool of last resort." She picked up a commercial-grade tourniquet from the table beside her. "This is a CAT, or Combat Application Tourniquet. It's what militaries around the world use. The key is placement, high and tight, and then you crank the windlass until the bleeding stops." She began to demonstrate on a practice limb, her movements fluid and practiced. The class watched, a few people leaning forward with mild interest. As she twisted the rod, she continued her lecture. "You have to remember, the patient is going to be in a lot of pain. The tourniquet hurts, but you have to ignore that. You're not saving their comfort, you're saving their life." From the back of the room, a gruff voice spoke up. "Why, you talk like you've done it before." Sarah looked up. The speaker was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with a weathered face and the look of a farmer. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a hint of skepticism in his gaze. He was the kind of man who probably thought the only real first aid was a stiff drink and a tractor ride to the doctor. "Everyone, this is just a demonstration," she said, deflecting smoothly, her gaze returning to the tourniquet. "The more you practice, and the more automatic it becomes." But the man, whose name was Earl, persisted. "That's not what I asked. You move like someone who's done it for real, not in a classroom, on a person." The room got a little quieter. A woman shifted in her seat. Sarah's hand paused on the windlass for a fraction of a second, a beat of silence so small only she would have noticed it. The ghosts stirred in the corners of her mind. "Experience is the best teacher," she said, her voice betraying nothing. She released the windlass and stood up straight. "Now, who wants to come up and try?" A few hands went up, breaking the tension. A young mother named Chloe volunteered and fumbled her way through the application under Sarah's patient guidance. The class chuckled good-naturedly at her struggles and the focus shifted back to the lesson. But Earl's question hung in the air, a tiny, invisible pebble thrown into a still pond. Sarah could feel the ripples, even if no one else acknowledged them. And the weeks went on. Sarah taught them how to splint fractures with rolled-up newspapers, how to recognize the signs of a stroke, and how to perform hands-only CPR. She was a good teacher, clear, knowledgeable, and endlessly patient. The class warmed to her, especially Chloe and a few of the other young mothers who saw her as a source of calm, practical wisdom. They'd ask her questions about their kids' fevers or their husband's back pain, and she'd answer with the same steady, competent air. Now Earl, however, remained a quiet observer. He never asked another pointed question, but Sarah often felt his eyes on her, studying her. It was unsettling. She had spent years learning to be invisible, to blend into the background of any environment. In Afghanistan, that skill had kept her and her team alive. In Millbrook, it had allowed her to build a quiet, anonymous life. Earl, with his simple, direct question, threatened that. The final class arrived. It was a practical assessment scenario, and Sarah had dimmed the lights and set up a few casualties, training dummies with mock injuries taped to them. The class was split into 2 teams. Their task was to enter the room, triage the victims, and treat the most critical injuries first. It was controlled chaos, with people talking over each other, trying to remember their training. Sarah moved between the groups, offering quiet guidance. Remember your ABCs: airway, breathing, circulation. What's your priority? Then, she saw it, and one of the dummies was lying in a corner, partially hidden by a chair. It was the worst casualty, a complex scenario she had set up but hadn't yet pointed out. A young man named Kevin, who worked at the diner, was kneeling beside it. He had applied a tourniquet, but it was in the wrong place and he was fumbling with the windlass, a look of panic on his face. "Kevin, you're doing great. Slow down," Sarah said, kneeling beside him. "The principles are the same." "I just focus on the mechanism." Kevin looked at her, his face pale under the dim light. "I can't, Sarah. I'm freaking out. What if it was real? What if this was a person?" Sarah put a steadying hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. The fear is normal. Use it. Let it sharpen your focus, not paralyze you." She gestured to the dummy. "Just the mechanics. Show me." As Kevin took a shaky breath and tried again, the scenario continued around them. But one of the walking wounded, a man with a fake head wound, played by a chuckling Earl, wandered over. He watched Sarah for a moment, then looked at the dummy, then back at her. "Kid's doing all right," Earl said, his voice low. "Better with a good teacher. A teacher who's been there." Sarah didn't look at him. "Kevin, the windlass. You need to turn it until the bleeding stops. It's going to take more force than you think." The evening ended. The class was a success. People thanked her, then shook her hand, and said they felt more confident. They filed out into the cool night air, their chatter fading into the darkness. Sarah stayed behind to pack up her equipment, coiling the practice tourniquets and stacking the mannequins in a corner. The silence of the empty room was a balm after the noise of the simulation. She was just about to turn off the lights when she heard a footstep. She turned. Earl was standing just inside the doorway, his hands in the pockets of his worn jacket, and the overhead lights cast deep shadows on his face. "Did you forget something, Earl?" she asked, her voice neutral, but her body subtly shifting, a vestige of a lifetime of situational awareness. "Nope," he said. He walked slowly into the room, his gaze taking in the scattered equipment, then settling on her. "Just wanted to talk, without an audience." Sarah waited. The air in the room suddenly felt thick. "I was in Nam," Earl said, his voice flat. 69 to 70, 1st Cavalry Division. "I wasn't a medic. I was a grunt, a rifleman. But I saw what the docs did. I saw what they had to do." He paused, his eyes meeting hers with a directness that was almost painful. "I know that look you have, that quiet. It's the look of a person who's held someone together with their bare hands while the world was trying to blow them apart. I saw it the first night." Sarah felt the carefully constructed walls of her new life tremble. She could deny it. She could make something up, and say she was a nurse in a rough ER or a paramedic in a busy city. The lies were right there, ready to be spoken. But looking into Earl's old, tired eyes, eyes that had seen their own share of horror, the lies felt like a betrayal, not of him, but of herself, of the ghosts she carried. She slowly sat down on the edge of a table, the plastic table creaking under her weight. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just looked at the floor. "You were a medic?" Earl asked, his voice softer now. Sarah nodded. "U.S. Navy, hospital corpsman, assigned to a Marine Special Operations team." The words felt strange in her mouth, like stones she had swallowed long ago and was now bringing back up one by one. Earl let out a low whistle. "DevGru? The teams?" "Not DevGru, MARSOC, a Marine Raider team," she clarified. "We did a lot of direct action, a lot of village stability operations, a lot of things in between." The room went quiet. It was a different kind of quiet than before. It wasn't the empty silence of a classroom. It was a heavy, respectful quiet, filled with the weight of shared, unspoken understanding. Earl didn't press. He just stood there, a silent witness. Sarah took a deep breath. The words started to come, at first haltingly, then in a low, steady stream. She didn't look at him. She looked at her hands, the hands that had once held a rifle and a scalpel. "I was on my 3rd deployment," she began. "Helmand Province. We were moving through a village, gathering intel. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. I was walking behind the team leader, a guy we called Ice. He was the best. Cool under fire. Always had your 6. She paused, her jaw tightening. "The IED didn't make a sound. Not that I remember. It was just a violent, deafening absence of sound, followed by a roar of dust and pressure. 1 second Ice was there, the next he was on the ground, his leg gone, just below the knee. The other guys, they went down too. The world turned into noise and chaos, gunfire from the rooftops, screaming, the air thick with dust and the smell of explosives and something else, something metallic and terrible." Her voice dropped even lower, forcing Earl to lean in to hear. "Training took over. It's a switch that flips. You stop being a person and become a function. My job was to keep them alive until the medevac came. I crawled to Ice first." He was conscious, looking at his leg, and his face pale as ash. I got a tourniquet on him in seconds. "You're good, Ice," I told him. "You're good. Just stay with me." He looked at me and nodded. He trusted me. She closed her eyes for a second, the memory as vivid as if it were happening right then. The other guys, Dawson had shrapnel in his chest and neck. Every breath he took was a wet, gurgling sound. I had to do a needle decompression on the spot, just to let his lung reinflate. As I shoved a 14-gauge catheter into his chest, right between his ribs, he screamed. I had to ignore it. Murphy had a sucking chest wound. I peeled back his gear, found the hole, and sealed it with the plastic from an MRE wrapper, taping it on 3 sides. All the while, rounds were cracking over our heads. My team leader, the new guy, he was laying down cover fire, screaming for the QRF. I couldn't help him. I had my own war to fight, right there in the dirt. Eat with my 3 friends. The silence returned, thicker than before. Sarah's hands were clenched into fists on her knees. She hadn't told this story to anyone, ever. Not to the debriefing officers, not to the VA shrink she saw for 6 mandated sessions, not to herself in any coherent way. It had just been fragments, nightmares, flinching at loud noises. "The bleeding wouldn't stop on Murphy," she continued, her voice a monotone. "The chest seal wasn't enough. And I think something major was hit inside. I had to find the source, but I couldn't. I just kept packing the wound with gauze, holding pressure, talking to him. Stay with me, Murph. Remember that time in Lejeune? You're going to be telling that story for years. Just stay with me." He was looking at me, his eyes getting hazy. He was going into shock. I could see it. I could see him slipping away.